When you're entering the market, you think you know exactly what you're going to build, and that quickly changes because as you start speaking to people, it becomes very, very clear what the product should be exactly. We were very lucky because we were able to work with a data center locally that purchased our product early on, and we sort of developed the product specifically for that data center. And then that was the product that we sold to many other data centers as well. It's Margarita Groisman from Aravolta, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Welcome back to the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. I'm Joshua Feinberg, and today we're talking about one of the hardest problems in digital infrastructure and AI, how great companies can actually break through the noise, keep track of what's going on in the industry, and earn market attention. Joining me today is Margarita Groisman, who is from Aravolta, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to talk about go-to-market execution in the data center industry and AI-driven infrastructure shifts, especially technical storytelling, buyer education, and what it really takes to build visibility in a surprisingly crowded marketplace. So you mentioned that one of your bigger challenges that you're facing right now is getting your name out there as a startup. Why do you find that it's so difficult in today's data center marketplace and AI infrastructure market to cut through the noise?
Yeah, I don't know if I actually fully agree that I think getting our name out there has actually been possible just with traditional methods like email and LinkedIn and kind of all the, like Twitter, all the kind of social media aspects. I think what's a little bit more challenging is kind of on the PR side and coverage and kind of being a recognized brand. But I think that just takes time and years, just because obviously as the word spread around people who are using Aravolta, people learn about our name.
Yeah, it's got to be a really interesting context shift because before you started Aravolta, you were with arguably one of the three most well-known cloud infrastructure companies on the planet at Microsoft, right?
Yes, that's correct. So very, very different experience, obviously coming from a very big recognizable brand to a brand new company.
Was this your first first time as an entrepreneur?
Yes.
Interesting. Like I mentioned right before we started recording, I'm seeing a really fascinating pattern emerging with a lot of great talent coming out of Redmond into the solving some of the most pressing problems that probably may not be multi-billion-dollar problems right out of the gate, but certainly are pretty significant given the headwinds with high-density AI infrastructure buildouts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been seeing the similar out of Meta and Google data center teams. There's just so much to build. And I think we got early visibility into kind of the needs from what was going on in 2021, 2022, 2023, and the large data center build out then.
Yeah, no, a lot of the demarcation point seems to be when the world got really serious about generative AI, but that also changed quite a bit in working environments and capital markets and the world returning to more traditional hybrid and in-office arrangements. So a lot going on at the same time.
Yes, 100%.
Do you find when you look at some of your peers, technical founders, that they struggle sometimes with explaining what they're doing in the marketplace in the first few years?
No, I think recently data centers have become an extremely well-known topic and kind of name. And so I think when you talk about data center software or kind of what people are building within it, it's now a little bit more recognizable in the general public as well.
And that's mostly been a relatively good thing in the last few years. I entered the space about 10 years ago, coming from the managed services world. And at the time, the only people outside of the industry who knew what a data center was if you happened to be like a retail investor or work on Wall Street and you saw the quarterly earnings from one of the real estate investment trusts or something like that. Fast forward to today, it's not just that Sam Altman and Jensen Huang have become celebrities of sorts. Now you have all this community backlash against a lot of the data center expansion as well. So it's a lot of complex challenges.
Yeah, I would say, definitely more new, good and bad visibility, but agree that it's definitely a big change from back in the day when no one knew what a data center was.
When you were working at Microsoft, did you have the opportunity to get involved in go-to-market kind of conversations? Were you working on teams where you're often brought into commercial conversations, or did you have the luxury of just really specializing on the technology build out?
Yeah, we were much more specialized on the technology build out. We were doing new clusters. So our customer was basically an internal customer, what we called the growth team. So my job was to scale out the first couple of instances of a new chip that would come out, and then basically prove out that that chip and the configuration we had it in was ready before it scaled up throughout all of our data centers.
So it was almost like an internal proof of concept.
Yes, like a very large proof of concept where you deploy, a couple rows of racks and cabinets in like four different data centers.
Yeah, it's I guess just all relative because it's such a different context from looking at a startup perspective versus where Microsoft is at. I remember being at a digital marketing conference in the early 2010s, and someone was explaining the infrastructure that Microsoft was building out at the time to support Xbox. And cloud and SaaS and public versus private versus hybrid was so new at that point that it really was fascinating to see what they had to do to accomplish that. But yeah, times go by quickly.
Yeah, 100%.
How have high density AI workloads and the overall boom or building boom, development boom around AI infrastructure changed how you think about your go-to-market challenges with growing a startup like Aravolta?
Yeah, so maybe it would help give context on what actually Aravolta does. So Aravolta deploys a node into the data center that onboards all electrical, cooling, and IT equipment. And we monitor and control that equipment. So we provide an API for those purposes. For us, we've just seen a lot of new types of data centers and new types of clients and people who are entering the market fully ready for AI. But we've also been seeing traditional enterprise, traditional colocation. The node is plug and play, so it doesn't actually matter if it's an AI data center or just a low density, 5 kilowatt per cabinet data center. I think it's more so in the type of people in the market is the larger change.
Have you found that AI is making differentiation easier or making it more challenging for a company like yours?
I don't think it's making it more challenging or easier. I think there's a lot more entrance to the market, but I think a lot of people don't really have too much experience in day-to-day data center operations. So,
because there's such a new influx of talent in the last few years.
Exactly.
It's interesting too. When I started going to data center events about 10 years ago, I'd look around the room and realize that I was more mid-career and I was one of the younger people in the room. And that's not I don't think the industry has made a tremendous amount of progress on that. And as a result, you have a lot of baby boomers where the institutional knowledge is now walking out the door and a lot of the industry is panicking, what can we do? But at the same time, you look at platforms like what you're building and it's clearly designed to do a lot more with fewer people, right?
Yeah, so the whole idea is that basically you don't need 6 different software services across your electric and then a separate software service across your cooling and then a separate software service for branch circuit monitoring and then a completely separate system for your IT and management network and any other component. You basically plug in a node and have the full monitoring and control suite fully available. So yes, I would say it's created a lot of opportunity in that way.
And do you find because of the number of different systems that you're integrating with that it requires being able to speak to different kinds of stakeholders in larger organizations? Or are you finding that there's been more consolidation of responsibilities and the personas and the segmentation isn't as challenging as it might have seemed a few years ago?
So the type of client we sell to is like VP of operations, COO, CTO of the organization, the tendency. So it's really straightforward, I would say. If you're saying in terms of integrations with other softwares, we do that. But the most important thing for us is integration with a variety of make model vendors. So that's what we specialize in. We could integrate any electrical, any cooling device, any IT device. It doesn't matter who or what protocol they use. We're able to integrate. And so that's really where we focus on. And obviously there are thousands and thousands of make models and vendors.
What's interesting about building a new platform like this is 10 years ago, that conversation at a high level would have been all about the APIs. Are you also thinking about like MCPs and how this is going to work with the language models at the same time where you're building this out?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually interesting because we've gotten actually just a question from a client, like, can we integrate this with an MCP? And 100%, that's something we're thinking about internally to Aravolta.
The marketplace that we're in right now, we're finding increasingly, especially among IT professionals and facilities engineers, that they're doing so much more research before they're ready to have a conversation with anyone from a commercial team, regardless of the perceived value of those kinds of conversations in this world. Buyer education seems to be getting increasingly important for being able to have a say in criteria and driving priorities. How are you thinking about buyer education as you're scaling Aravolta?
Yeah, I mean, we have found all of our buyers to be extremely well educated in this space. They always have very complex technical questions. So I would say but we've kind of seen the opposite end of the spectrum where they're completely new to the market. It's their first time deploying a data center, and we're kind of hand-holding them through the process. So yeah, I guess we have seen both ends of the spectrum. I do think buyer education is important, but not necessarily if they have the right partner.
So in some cases, you're leaning on like a channel partner, an ISV, to take care of that heavy lifting with making sure that expectations are aligned and the prerequisites are met for them to be successful.
No, we provide a white glove service. So we've gone direct to market and have not relied on channel partnerships except for a client in Singapore and a client in Australia where we couldn't have kind of as hands-on access to the facility. But otherwise, we usually send an engineer on site to the data center facility and help make that integration period extremely smooth for the data center.
I think increasingly in a world where so much is driven by self-service and marketplaces, we see that buyer education will continue to be important. And I'm really curious to get your perspective coming from being ex-Microsoft, who created this massive moat and playbook. I mean, as an early MCSE, as someone who was in the Windows ecosystem pretty early on, there's so much mind share and brand share that Microsoft built successfully over the decades that allowed it to not necessarily get everything perfect, but gave it so many second chances because of ecosystem and the hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people that have been through its training and certifications. Has any of that influenced how you think about buyer education with Aravolta?
Yeah, I mean, I think Microsoft has built an extremely amazing playbook in terms of how they build out data center capacity. So I think in terms of looking at how they do things, to me, it was more so how they do their tooling and how they manage their infrastructure at such a large scale. That's definitely the larger component for our organization.
When you look at other kinds of companies in your ecosystem throughout data center technology, data center facilities, the operators, the service providers, the colocation companies, some have made significant investments over the years, some have not. Some of them are just getting started. Some of them are fairly far along. When you look at those kinds of resources, if you were mentoring someone you were hiring or mentoring a former peer that was looking at upskilling, what do you see that companies across the board seem to be doing right with buyer education? And what do you think that one of the glaring mistakes that's holding them back?
Yeah, I mean, so my opinion is that when a buyer is coming to a company, it's because they have really core problem that needs to be solved and usually needs to be solved urgently. And they almost always know what that problem is. On the education piece, I think usually the education is more about what are the options out there and then what are the benefits and the cons of each one. I don't know if I would have any advice on the specific investments in buyer education that they should make.
I'm curious too, in the life cycle of getting a new startup off the ground, have you run into anything so far where if you were approaching it the second time around, you would be much more efficient? Is there some lesson that you've learned so far in the first several months of getting Aravolta off the ground that with 2020 hindsight, you would have approached a little differently?
Yeah, well, our company's almost 2 years old, and I guess we've learned a lot on the way. So I think it was kind of when you're entering the market, you think you know exactly what you're going to build, and that quickly changes because as you start speaking to people, it becomes very, very clear what the product should be exactly. We were very lucky because we were able to work with a data center locally that purchased our product early on, and we sort of developed the product specifically for that data center. And then that was the product that we sold to many other data centers as well. So that really back and forth and not kind of making assumptions about what the client wants, but actually working together with the client to build exactly what they need, and then going to everyone else with a similar profile to that client is kind of what helped us significantly.
That's really cool. It reminds me so much of that whole idea that Eric Ries, lean startup, Steve Blank talk about, where there's no answers in the building, no initial idea survives first customer contact. So it's great you're able to have that experience. I'm always curious though, for software founders, how do you balance making sure that that initial customer's requests and what you're building don't turn your company into a custom software developer as opposed to some one that's looking to build a more scalable platform?
Yeah, so obviously you don't want to just be like a software shop, right? But usually if one customer has some very specific needs, it means many other people have those needs as well. Like there's a reason they weren't able to just purchase it off the market and purchase it from, at that time we were just a couple months old. So I think usually you can take that product and now it's a product that's sellable at scale.
When you look at what's going on industry-wide, do you think there's a go-to-market strategy that's quietly failing right now that people just don't want to admit has seen its better days?
Yeah, I mean, I think email outbound is kind of has seen better days because now everyone's email is influxed with basically every company in the whole wide world trying to sell. So I think that's kind of somewhat outdated. It may still work for some teams, but I think people should be creative. I think with Aravolta and our marketing, a big part of it was also just word of mouth. Just because after our first customer, we're able to land our second, then our third, and then our fourth. And then another component has actually been just in-person and conferences has been a huge component in actually meeting our clients face-to-face, showing them the product, and kind of not relying on like internet channels.
So you're finding in terms of getting past the trust barrier, the number one playbook that's worked for you so far is face-to-face at events. A close second would be word-of-mouth introductions from existing customers and prospects.
Yes, that has been the two biggest lead generations.
And there hasn't been a magic outbound email campaign or outbound LinkedIn strategy or anything that's come anywhere near that?
Nothing magic, unfortunately, yeah.
Super fascinating. So the more we go deeper into digital and generative AI, the more the playbook starts to look a little bit like it did 25 years ago.
Exactly.
Early Web 1.0, where everyone's on LinkedIn, but when it comes to what's actually giving people those 25, 30 touch points, the confidence and is a lot more of the touch points being face-to-face.
Exactly. I think face-to-face with our clients. And again, our product hasn't really existed historically on the market. Like you would have to purchase 6 different software solutions across multiple vendors, and those vendors would try to lock you into their hardware as well. An important component with Aravolta is we're make, model, vendor agnostic, right? So we don't sell electrical equipment, we don't sell cooling equipment, but we onboard that equipment and allow our customers to control and monitor it. And so being able to kind of share that new ability at conferences is kind of what's been working well, because otherwise customers wouldn't know to even search for it or that this is an available tool that they have.
Most data center GTM teams are flying completely blind. 83% of your buyer's journey is happening before they even speak with someone from your sales team. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is powered by DCSMI. We've studied over 1,900 industry leaders to build a diagnostic framework that identifies exactly why deals fall apart and revenue stalls. Stop guessing and start benchmarking. Subscribe now to our weekly data center GTM briefing at www.dcsmi.com/briefing. Again, that's dcsmi.com/briefing, BRIEFING. I noticed when I was learning a little bit more about your background, it looked like you're also part of Y Combinator's ecosystem.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's got to be a really, really interesting perspective to be hanging around with technology entrepreneurs and then going over to a somewhat very different world in the data center industry ecosystems, where a lot of the playbook hasn't changed very much in decades. A lot of the people that are still making decisions have been in these roles for literally decades. Have you seen any interesting compare contrast between those two worlds?
Oh yeah, it's very funny because people at YC, some other companies, they just sell to other YC companies and like really small companies, which obviously for us is a very different experience. We're selling usually to larger organizations that take basically enterprise contracts. It takes a longer period of time. So very different than I would say the typical YC company sales experience, and obviously a very different ecosystem. But yeah.
When you look at those two different worlds, do you see any particular area of waste where a lot of budgets are being kind of misallocated right now? And if they had better visibility into what was actually working, they might pivot pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of data center budgets going, like I said, through many software vendors when they could be kind of spending on one software vendor that is aggregating all the data. Then they can take that data from every single make, model, asset in the data center and build their own tooling internally. Just because now with tools like Codex and Claude, it's so easy to build anything you want. But what data centers don't have visibility in is into their own assets. Technicians have to manually usually log in and figure out what's going on, or they have too many systems to be able to aggregate all that data.
As someone who's worked for a huge Fortune 500 leader in this space in digital infrastructure and now building your own startup, I'm really interested to get your perspective on why so many technical companies are now struggling to turn technical expertise into sales pipeline. I see increasingly a lot of people in commercial teams, like people that have been account executives and account managers for decades, are putting a lot more work into upskilling. I see a lot more companies are bringing on non-traditional hires like career IT professionals and engineers who never worked on a commercial team before, but now are incredibly desirable as peers. Why do you think companies are struggling so much with this transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important for the sales folks to be very technical. 90% of all of our sales calls are with engineers or technicians or network engineers or the CTO. And they're usually figuring out the way that the software is going to be deployed, cloud-based, on-prem, the specific configurations, how it actually works. So because the discussion is so technical, it's very important for the team to be technical.
It's been really quick how fast that change took hold over the last couple of years. I was interviewing someone who was running the business development program for one of the big data center operators in the US. I think it was DataBank. And he was talking about the kind of training regimen and mentoring that he was offering with his team members. And I said, based on what you're doing, it sounds like if anyone from your team were to leave the confines of a large enterprise and all of a sudden go out next week and decide to be on their own, they could almost immediately be a fractional CTO for small and medium-sized businesses. And he's like, exactly, that's exactly what we're going for. And it seems this has really accelerated among the operators and the technology companies over the last couple of years. Do you see this slowing down anytime soon, or do you see that the future of the sales development rep, the business development rep, account executives, account managers, that they're going to look a lot more like consultants and a lot less focused on someone who's trying to get to President's Club?
Yeah, kind of like I said, I strongly think that it's mostly going to be technical people, like engineers who are kind of acting as salespeople, or basically sales engineers is going to be the core role, at least in this industry.
Do you think some of that has to do with the amazingly powerful self-service resources that people now have access to, where they can have conversations with Copilot and Claude and Gemini that rival the conversations that they would have had with the human salesperson a couple of years ago?
Yeah, a big component. And that's actually how some of our inbound has come in, like people chatting with something and it brings up Aravolta as a solution. I think they actually are able to self-educate themselves on a solution a lot of the time before they actually come into the call. And then by the time the call is happening, it's already on the technical aspects of the integration.
And this was something that, for the most part, sales teams had to contend with from the 2010s on. At the time, like CEB, that's part of Gartner, found that I think at the 2010s, it was like 56, 57% of a journey was over before sales contact. Now it's like well over 90%. Marketplaces have pushed this close to 100%. Channel partners, to a certain degree, are picking up a lot of this pieces. What do you think sales teams are consistently misunderstanding about today's technical buyers?
Yeah, so I could only speak from my experience, right? I came from a technical role at Microsoft to now basically leading sales at Aravolta and other roles as well. But with what I'm seeing, like I said, the conversation number one and the way we compete is the technical capabilities of the product and nothing else. So I think that is kind of the core of the conversation, which is that, again, we could onboard any make, model, vendor, a capability that did not previously exist across any data center software, DCIM, EPMS, BMS, any service or vendor.
With scaling a company like yours at this point, with where we are in the ecosystem and buying habits, are you looking to grow a traditional team, or right out of the gate, are you looking for people that are super technical that wouldn't look like a traditional account executive or account manager?
Yeah, so we're hiring what we call like forward deployed engineers. And to us, that means both on like the integration aspect. So they are heavily involved in making the software work for the specific client, which is they onboard the node or the physical hardware that's able to onboard the rest of the devices in the data center. And then they make that experience basically smooth and flawless. Because I think based on some of the questions you were asking earlier, historically, people would need multiple vendors and multiple requirements just to be able to onboard a new vendor. And we are eliminating all of that back and forth. I think with the forward deployed engineer role, they're also kind of going to come in as sales engineers to, answer customer questions and kind of be with a customer from the very start or from the first demo to getting the product scaled across the organization.
Kind of plays into the whole idea of what SaaS companies were running into 5 or 10 years ago, where they'd have to be super careful to make sure that an account executive wasn't over-promising what was possible today and leaving a mess for client success and account managers to have to clean up within onboarding post-purchase.
Exactly.
So it gets totally around that. With all of this in mind, what do you think makes it so challenging for companies to reach economic buyers today in a world where so many technical buyers have become so much more sales allergic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what you're saying, which is people are allergic to sales calls and kind of humping in and seeing like a nice, beautiful deck or some, generic presentation. It really has to be specific to the organization, specific to their technical requirements. And yeah.
I mean, based on your background and being a founder, I imagine that a lot of people that are super curious about what's happening with innovation in your category will be motivated to take a meeting with another founder. How does this continue to scale as you look to get into the double, triple digits with growing Aravolta?
How does what continue to scale?
How does that feel? How does the onboarding, how does the process, how does being able to scale so there's dozens of people running your playbook that you've built with clients globally?
Yeah, so I think we're in that stage right now where we're trying to scale very quickly. And now we're having a very lean team try to deal with many customers. And obviously, every customer is going to have some kind of niche requests or specific things that are specific to them. I think the way we're able to operate with such a lean team across our client base and scale that playbook that we were talking about with having the forward deployed engineer is basically just building a product that can work across any data center and can be onboarded instantaneously. Again, this is the technical answer, but the way the node works is it scans all the IPs that are on the network. And every time it sees an IP, it's able to basically self-identify the make, model, and vendor, and then the base protocol of that device. So whether it's SNMP, IPMI, Modbus, BACnet, anything at all that device is using, and then onboard it automatically. So the software itself is built to scale. The forward deployed engineer is just there to make that process extremely smooth for the client.
Curious too, how did you come up with the concept of calling this role a forward deployed engineer? Did you sense that the VPs of operations would consider this person a peer or the kind of person that they'd hire internally, either on a full-time or on a contract basis? Why that particular way of branding this particular position that you think is making it so attractive to highly technical buyers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason is that it's attractive is because historically onboarding software for the data center is the biggest pain ever and very difficult and takes a very long time. Like I think the traditional DCIM EPMS would be like 6 months plus onboarding time period. And we take that down to maybe 2 days, 2 weeks in some cases with networking back and forth, but in a really short time period. And I think we make that possible, one, because of the technology, and two, because of the people that are hands-on, basically hand-holding the client, rather than just kind of giving them something and saying, okay, go, you guys figure it out.
So it's not just a matter that you're able to promise a much faster onboarding experience than anyone else in the industry, but you're taking on responsibilities that normally the client would have had to allocate resources to doing themselves.
Exactly.
Can you tell me about something that you've tried so far with Aravolta that didn't work, that kind of completely failed, and what you eventually worked instead?
Yeah, so Aravolta started out as a DCIM, so data center infrastructure management, where you're more so focused on the IT than you are at the building level. Now we're actually 90% of our clients are co-locations. So they are 100% building assets, right? So like electrical and cooling. And so I think the reason we've seen that is just because that's where there's really, really a strong need and a strong basically lack of, like, all the products that exist on the market are, like I said, extremely long onboarding time periods, extremely legacy products, kind of lock you in and very, very expensive. So I would say that is the biggest transition we've had from moving from a DCIM to a full electric building management service.
With all of these frustrations that you're hearing now, were these similar frustrations that you're hearing around the same time when you were working on these projects at Microsoft, either because of your own internal frustrations, or were you hearing about them from peers? Or I'm just curious, what was the original spark of the idea that this was something that people were really dissatisfied with? Because DCIM's been around, I don't know, probably at least 10, 15, early 2010s. Yeah. And there's been a lot of consolidation in the category. What made you see that there was this open space for something a little new?
I think it was the gap in data. So even internally to Microsoft, like just to be able to figure out what was going on with my cluster, I would have to probably reach out to like 6 different teams just to kind of get some of the data I needed and kind of model everything accurately. So there was still a gap, and especially a gap on being able to onboard both the electrical and the cooling, and at the rack level and at the server and at the networking level. So put all that data in one place.
As you're looking to scale your own go-to-market team and bring on the right leadership, are there certain parts of it that you've decided to do in-house as opposed to outsourced? And is there anything that you've learned along the way that's helped shape your thinking on what to do going forward with recruiting and growing a team?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing everything, right? So like in-house, like the entire exec team is reaching out to people, doing interviews. We've done a lot of work trials, and we're just trying to find that perfect fit for both the sales and the engineering teams as we're trying to grow them very, very quickly. And then we're also been working with some recruiting teams. So I think just taking every approach and trying to find the right fit.
What have you found to be especially challenging with replicating for authenticity, being able to kind of clone yourself?
Yeah. What do you mean by replicating authenticity?
Like being able to hire the right people that share your values, that come from the right background, that are passionate about solving the same kind of problem. What have you found to be especially challenging with doing that, regardless of whether you're talking about internal team members or outsourcing partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think hiring is just always a challenge because you want someone experienced, but you also want someone very excited and very moldable. And those are not usually two traits that are come in one person. It's kind of one or the other. So finding someone who could learn very quickly, understand the software and start building on top of it, but then also sell that software. It's just a large number of traits that you have to find in one person, and a pretty rare combination. So
imagine too, like with everything from being involved in a traditional incubator like YC, there's the whole idea of that founders sometimes are really attracted to hiring for logos, but a lot of times they need people that are super scrappy, that can wear 10, 20, 30 different hats, that can figure things out when the playbook is on like version 1.0. How have you navigated that yourself, coming from the world of having so much support internally versus having to figure that out and finding team members that can figure things out on the fly without a lot of support infrastructure in place?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, which is that's kind of the characteristics we're looking for, as in can figure things out, can wear multiple hats, is generally basically able to learn, like I said, very quickly, new technology. So I think in the data center industry, you don't see too many people like that because you mostly see people who have been in the industry, 20 years, selling very specific things or working on very specific niche types of software. So, sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, the balancing act of that board members also often push founders into hiring for logos. But the challenge with hiring for logos is a lot of times they were at a company that was the 400th person in that job function on playbook 117. And it's a whole different set of challenges for someone that's a brand new entrant to the market that doesn't have product market fit or go to market fit.
Yeah, I don't think we would ever hire for logos or care honestly about the logo a person comes from. It's very much about the skill set that they have.
Final area I want to ask you about today is to get your thoughts on where we are headed next. Where do you think your role as a founder of a company like Aravolta, and where do you think the industry as a whole is going in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question where the industry is going. Obviously, it's growing very significantly. A lot of people have been talking about like the AI bubble and the data center bubble. I actually think the opposite. I think a lot of the projects that have been announced won't actually work out, but that's because they are missing many components, but the actual need or like the demand is truly there. So yeah, in terms of where the industry is going, I think it's going to basically a standardized software stack, a software like Aravolta that could do the whole set of tasks required in a data center, monitor the equipment, remotely control the equipment. I think data centers will need even less people on site. I think a lot of edge sites especially will be much more important as inference workloads become more relevant. And I think because of that, softwares that could fully manage the data centers remotely will be a large component of how they run.
So this whole idea of communities thinking that there's going to be job creation and it will be more in the ecosystem, it sounds like it's going to be way more in the ecosystem than physically in the facilities themselves.
I would personally say that, yeah, probably much more. There will be a lot more jobs, but they'll be distributed jobs, not necessarily on site at the physical facility.
Yeah, I mean, we track 57 different business models in the ecosystem. I think people outside of the data center industry have no idea that there's anywhere near this many different kinds of businesses that are involved in every single build and maintenance and everything like that. And it's probably one of the bigger challenges for developers to be able to successfully sell in the next couple of years is what those opportunities look like. And that many of them create great jobs and create great startup opportunities, but it's definitely a different playbook.
Yeah, no, so sorry. I mean, on the operations of the data center, obviously on the actual build of the data center, that's a huge amount of jobs that are locally sourced on the construction and all the different aspects of building on the land.
Yeah, it's been super fascinating to get your take. And again, what's going to be really neat as well is to go back and look at this and look at the commonalities and the differences between Microsoft alumni founders in the data center industry that have launched in the last 5 years. Because I'm really, really curious. As I mentioned before, I've seen pockets of this coming out of Schneider Electric, but I definitely am seeing pockets coming out of Microsoft and seeing a little bit coming out of Cisco as well. So there must be something in the culture there that is encouraging entrepreneurial thinking. And it'd be really interesting to see how this plays out in the coming years. Margarita, if someone wants to follow what you're working on or reach out to you, is LinkedIn a good place to start?
Yes, LinkedIn is probably the best place to start.
And if someone wants to learn more about Aravolta, where would you send them first?
Aravolta.com, Aravolta.com.
Well, we'll include links to those in the show notes as well. So people that want to learn more about what you're working on and what you're building can follow there. I've been speaking today with Margarita Groisman, who is the Chief Executive Officer, founder of Aravolta, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks so much for joining me, Margarita.
Great. Thank you, Joshua. Have a great one.
Most data center GTM teams are flying completely blind. 83% of your buyer's journey is happening before they even speak with someone from your sales team. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is powered by DCSMI. We've studied over 1,900 industry leaders to build a diagnostic framework that identifies exactly why deals fall apart and revenue stalls. Stop guessing and start benchmarking. Subscribe now to our weekly Data Center GTM briefing at www.dcsmi.com/briefing. Again, that's dcsmi.com/briefing, BRIEFING.